Yep. All right. We're going to call this meeting of the Board of Education to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Can we get a motion to approve the meeting agenda? Ms. Downey, is there a second? Ms. Hirsch? All those in favor of approving the meeting agenda?
Aye.
All right, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. All right, the first order of business is an action item. Mr. O'Keefe or Dr. Jones? It's the interim appropriation for GHS. Great.
Good evening, everybody. Okay, in the, Jen Watson went out and got all the estimates, and the total of the interim appropriation and the total of the estimates received is $683,000, to be exact, $682,503.16. Of that amount, the amount for the response, the repair, and reconstruction is $341,000, and to replace all of the similar joints will cost $342, so it adds up to $683. The response, repair, reconstruction will be submitted to insurance as far as I know. And then as far as the joints for $342, that would be, that would be part of the interim, and we give up the $250 that's in our 2021 request for capital for those joints.
Before we go any further, just note that Dan Watson had a family emergency today, which is why he's not here with us. I'm sure he'd love to be here, though. Before we make a motion on this, I guess when I looked at the breakdown of the numbers, I see some contingencies. Is that contingency for both aspects of the project? Does it cover? Is there enough contingency in there, knowing that these things always take?
I did ask that. I think it was 15%.
Yeah, I see. Sorry, I see the 15% on the second page. I'm trying to figure out where. Third page. I'm trying to figure out where that was calculated off of, whether that was contingency on the entire project or contingency just on the emergency repairs, because that's what it looked like to me.
Yeah, it looks like it's on, so calculated off of 284,000. Just above that number, the 42.
So I'm not sure that's a contingency for everything then.
If it's 15%, I would say it's, I don't have to calculate it, but 10% would be 28, 14, yeah, it's just on the 284. 15% on 284.
So now our professional services one, but maybe perhaps that's a little bit, the rest of it is a little bit, it's like hourly.
If you think that's the right number, that's the right number. I just want to make sure you guys have built in everything you need to. We do it once. All right, somebody want to make a motion?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
You have those table?
Yeah, why don't we do the motion?
Right, Peter?
All right, fine. Ms. Stowe, go ahead and make the motion.
Yeah,
I'd like to make a motion, to read the whole thing?
No, you move to request an interim.
Can we use the microphone,
read this
please?
part right here.
Or is it?
Recommended motion on the bottom of the yellow page.
Oh, thank you, I found it, okay. I'd like to make a motion to approve the interim appropriation request currently estimated at $682,503 to restore and repair the flooded areas and emergency replacement of all flexible joints.
Is there a second? Ms. Downey. All right, discussion, Mr. Sheriff.
I guess I have two questions. One's germane to this, and then one's germane. I can ask it one more time. I'm not gonna get that from time. Sean, I wasn't sure I could figure out from this, it was confusing to me. We originally requested $250K in the 2021 budget, capital budget, to
Correct.
replace these joints,
Correct.
right?
To replace the joints.
So for the comparable, what was the bid? The bid is higher than what we is it, did I read this correctly? Is the bid itself just for the replacement of the joints higher than what we were?
Yes, the second number, if you look at page 3, all-in cost for the joint replacements, $341,850.
So even if we had the 250, this would
Would
not
have
have
been enough.
I gotta, it begs the question, how are we estimating? Because I'm dying to know now in the capital budget that we just submitted, what else is off? You know, and I guess I don't, maybe it's not an answerable question now, but how often does this happen like this? Do you know? But I know you've been here like a whole of 30 seconds, so.
45 seconds.
Okay, well, yeah.
I
It'll be
do
50
remember Dan getting the call from this bidder, this is the low bidder, and he was quite shocked at how high it was, as you can imagine, being 90,000 higher than what we had estimated originally.
Yeah.
I mean, some of it, Peter, could be, if I understand this, there's a certain time frame we wanted to accomplish the work in, and so some of that's sort of
The same thing happened with the North Miamis air conditioners. It like went on and on and on, and they couldn't get the parts, and then they said they didn't estimate it right, and then they said the contractor changed the price, you know, and I get concerned about you're never gonna be precise with this, right? Because there's a timing lag. But these kinds of things, that's like a pretty big, it's not like the thing was 250 and it came in at 285, right? When the thing's coming in at 3+, you're kind of going, wait a minute, are we estimating properly? And then the question is, do we have some kind of process thing we need to address? It's an open question, it probably can't be answered without.
Right, but
But
it's a valid question. I think here at least we know these are real numbers based on an actual bidding process, so this work will be accomplished for this price.
My other question was unrelated, is Tony, I'm sorry, I've not read my Board of Ed email. It's like one of those things that I don't get to. Can you just, what is the contingency plan now that we have this gym floor thing again, and the sports, and where have the kids gone, and, cause nothing to do with you, but this is number 3, right? So we did this to a number of sports last spring. Boys basketball was a disaster last spring, and cheerleading and others. And the year before that, or when it was one before it leaked, it was another, whenever it was. So I worry that these teams are actually getting impacted in multiple years, right? That's not cool to do to kids. And I think we kind of send them to these other places we have, but these other places are not suitable for these sports. You know, so that's what we're trying to understand what the plan is here. And how long do we think we're gonna be out? Because the last time we were out, how long were we out last time? 8 weeks? I think we were, yeah.
We are working as aggressively as we can to actually get it replaced. I'm saying 6 weeks, I think it will be faster. But you never know until they get the work done. But they are literally working through the weekend, 4 days after this happened, the wood had been ordered, it had already been delivered. So they're expediting getting the floor back in service. We understand for the student athletes, it's a big deal. The pack is open. There will be some aesthetics as far as like maybe an ugly ceiling where you can see something, but the pack is back in service. We have a big concert there actually tonight. They're utilizing it. So it's really mainly the gym floor, and the challenge with the gym is trying to get space. And I have sent the board a couple of emails trying to keep you up to date in that. In the contract, some of the contract language does not match what we can do by charter. So we actually sent the contract, we had town legal look at it, but then the new firm that the first selectman hired also looked at it again. So there was one venue, we couldn't get the contract to match the language that is acceptable by the town charter. However, Brunswick worked with us, and correct, Sasha, that's where we are playing tonight is Brunswick, and we were able to work that out, so.
Literally after the meeting this morning, the contract, I signed it.
They brought it up.
Where is, Where are those teams practicing though?
Well, there's still.
I understand the whole thing of the games, but I'm wondering where are they
Yeah,
practicing?
there's still the other gyms, I mean, Mr. Lundin would have to answer how they organized all that, but there's still the other high school gyms as well as the gym, as well as some of the middle schools they were utilizing. But I don't have that schedule in front of me. He was
Could you
working
get an
with it.
answer from him and follow up? That would really be great.
Ms. Hirsch?
Sorry, along those same lines, I just want to make sure that equal time is being given to men's and women's sports that are practicing, and making sure that we're aware of the fact that the high school gym has more space around the courts as they do in the middle school. So, we have to be cautious about risk of injury to our students in the middle schools and giving them the appropriate space to practice for the varsity sports. So I just wanted to, I know we're there at Brunswick tonight. Is that where we're going to be continuing until we're?
They have certain dates that are scheduled. I think it's like 4 that they're playing at Brunswick, but again, I don't have the exact dates. I don't know if you have them, Sean, but they have opened at Brunswick, and that's where we are playing. And I will just say, I'm not really sure on the varsity piece about playing games at the middle school, where that came from. I don't know if it was in the media incorrectly, but that was definitely out there. They never had any intent of having varsity play at the middle school because of that distance and the aggressive nature of the play for varsity.
Boys and girls?
Yes. That's my understanding.
Same for JV?
I don't have the schedule. I know that JV, they were okay playing those at some middle schools, but I don't know how they ended up as of today.
Mr. Kelly?
I just have a quick question about insurance. What kind of insurance do we have for such things like this?
They haven't canceled this,
For the damage to the floor,
Correct, yes.
we do have insurance, and there's a deductible of $100,000.
So basically, if this thing is done correctly, then basically it'll cost us $100,000, not the amount we're putting forward here.
Well, $100,000 deductible for the damage and reconstruction, that initial 341, but for the other, replacing all the other joints, that's on us.
So when you say on us, who then goes after the contractor that created this problem? I know when I build something, I know that if we have something that happens within a reasonable time, we certainly, if it's not insured properly, we have to get a lawyer and go after them ourselves.
I know the risk manager at the town is involved.
So we are,
Yeah,
okay.
pursuing that.
I think the last time this happened, we were told that train already left the station because the amount of time from when construction was done to when it was turned over to when it was ours. I thought the last time we went through this, we were outside the warranty period. That's why we needed the appropriation.
I think they're still looking at other avenues, whether it's a defective part, whatever they're looking at. But anyway, it's out of our hands. We basically turned it over to the risk manager and town legal, so there's not a lot we can do about it.
And I think just for transparency too, just the idea that there are several connectors and you cannot do them all in 3 weeks, and that we can only do half of them because it has to do with hot and cold. So Dan has to wait until the weather warms up to do the other half. So this could be, it could be 3 or 4 months for the connectors. So could we have another one burst in 3 or 4 months? We could. So I think that's just being very open and honest about the status.
Follow-up question would be, is there somebody within who's supposed to be overseeing these things that have not done something correctly? Have we looked into that? Is this just an act of God? Is this something that we need to look at closely or more closely?
Again, I think Sean was alluding to the fact that the town actually hired somebody to look into this last spring, and it's just, they're hidden, you can't see them. It's not that they're supposed to be maintained or anything like that hasn't happened. It's the connector itself that's blowing.
It's either bad design, wrong part, there's a lot of different potentials, but as Tony said, it's not a maintenance issue. These have been put up behind walls. And we were already obviously in the process of requesting money to replace them because we felt like it was a bad idea to keep them there. We're just trying to move that up.
Okay, it seems like there's some assumptions being made here about bad design, about...
Well, we don't know, that's why they're looking at it.
So we feel satisfied that somebody's looking after our interest in this, because a bad design A warranty and a bad design does sometimes go further than the warranty on a faulty part if it's a bad design. There's a lot of, as long as we're okay, we're looking at it then.
Yeah, it sits with the risk and legal department over on the town side. So. All right, any other discussion? Yes, sir.
The only other question I forgot to ask, because I didn't see it noted in here, do we have information on the cost to rent? I mean, not our own buildings, but space at Brunswick or wherever we're going to be playing games, and is that something we'd be able to get back through the insurance process?
They were working on that today, what would be actually eligible or not, for instance, travel, if they have to hire an extra bus, that sort of thing. We don't have the answer to that yet, but if we can recoup those costs, we will.
If there's no other discussion, the motion on the table is to approve the interim request. All the,
It's not a question. Can you just walk us through then, it's going next to the BET? Just
yes,
walk
it
through
will
the
go
whole
next to
process.
the BET, and we have to have it into the RTM package by, I think it's called Valentine's Day. There's a day that's February something that week. So the BET, I forget when they meet, and then the RTM does not actually meet until early March. March. So the way this works from a the financial perspective is because it's an emergency repair, we are able to use operating funds to get the work done, get the floor done, and all the rest of it. We obviously would need operating funds to front the replacement work. We can't do that. What will happen is if it goes through the BET and then to the RTM, the money gets replenished back into the operational accounts that it comes from for the emergency repair.
And then sometime in March, if it all got, and then sometime in March, if it all got blessed, we can then start doing the next part. The
Yes.
250 part.
The next part would be the replacement.
We've actually started all of it, the replacement as well. I'm just making sure I understood that correctly.
Okay.
That's a lot of work, I guess.
I just have a lot regarding timing. Have we bought like those inflatable dams or whatever so that if one of these things blows again while we're sitting here waiting for this to be approved? Because as I understand it, these things let go and they let go in that hallway and then all the water runs down that hill and it goes right in the fire exit doors and onto the gym floor and it immediately warps the floor and here we go. So I'm wondering what the contingency plan is for this thing, if another one lets go, like next week, what's the plan of action? Just another?
And I certainly, when Dan Watson gets back, we can ask him, but I don't know a solution. I'm not an expert in this, obviously, but because there are still several of them, they're not all in the same location. I don't know how you would have like a swimming pool on the floor, every night. We were really lucky with this one that somebody that happened to be in the building on a federal holiday working saw the emergency, otherwise it.
But I understand they're all, Tony, the reason I'm asking the question is, I understand they're all in the walls or in the ceiling, in the PACS foyer. That's where I understood they all were. The last time we went through this, Joe was asking good questions, same questions we asked last time this went. My understanding is it's in those hallways, and that's why when it leaks, it then runs downhill through that foyer, because that floor is a tile floor. And it's just gonna go find its lowest point, and it goes into the PAC, because that's lower, and it goes onto the gym floor, because that's the same altitude, so to speak.
Yeah, we can certainly ask the consultant if there's a way to even block off the gym floor or something in the evenings or weekends, but when it blows, it's not just a leak.
It's a lot of water.
It is a lot of water, very, very fast when a sprinkler head blows or when it blows. And this one blew hard enough, it knocked the sprinkler head off that was next to the connector. So it's a lot of water, very, very fast.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Right, so with that, the motion on the table is for the interim appropriations for $682,503. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. That passes unanimously, and Dr. Jones, I'd ask that you begin to work with the BET and getting the RTM package together. Don't want to miss a beat there. All right, next up is the update on the GHS and Western Middle School field. I'll turn to you, Dr. Jones.
Thank you. First of all, on the GHS, we don't really have a report tonight, other than several of you went to the public hearing. So if you really wanted to go back and look at the presentation that was done that evening, that went over the remediation action plan, there was a PowerPoint that showed that AECom did, that showed where all of the testing had been conducted. Right now, we are in the process of working on field 6 and 7, which I think the board's apprised of, hoping that we can get approval for the current plan, which would go down a certain depth and then catch the turf back over field 6 and 7, so that hopefully we could be on track to get those done this summer. But again, for high school, we're waiting on the approval, when we hope within the next month or two that's coming. For Western, I think this may be one of the first kind of updates we've had, at least if ever or in a while, but we do have Langdon here and Ryan Wallstrom, who's working on this project. And I just want to point out the PowerPoint you have will be missing some slides, because he continued to work with the attorney today on enhancing the PowerPoint. So we will have this online, and we'll send this out to you with some extra slides. But if you could give you extra information tonight, I thought you would probably want it.
Thanks, Tony. So as she said, I'm Ryan Wallstrom. I work with Langen Engineering. I'm here with David Hurley. So this presentation was repurposed from something we've given to the regulators, the EPA and DEP. So there's some slides in here that are somewhat background material and photos for reference for them, because they haven't visited the site. So I'll kind of skip through those a bit quickly, and then I'll get into the assessment work that we've been working on, along with some of the active stuff we've been working on more recently. If you guys want to interrupt me with any questions or clarity, please let me know. So, history, this is an aerial photo taken from 1941 of the site. That outline is the athletic fields. What happened in the 1960s was the area was raised, kind of a plateau, and when they did that, they brought in a whole bunch of fill and blasted rock from an unknown source, and that's the fill that's really the contaminant, or the source of the contaminants of the site. Is that current photo? So for reference, for some of the things we'll be talking about future on and later on in this presentation, there's the school, obviously, there's a commercial bakery to the southeast, the Hollyville transfer station is to the north. And just for reference, these were more for the regulators, just some photos of the site and some reference. I'll flip through these. I think everyone here is kind of familiar with the area and the school itself. I'm going to pause right here to show, because I'll be talking about this a little later as well. This is the pedestrian walkway that is to the northeast of the fields. This is likely where we want to expand, do some earthwork, and to build a entrance and exit ramp for the trucks when ultimately this remediation does take place. The intent is to avoid using the access and entrance to the school to the west, as well as avoiding all the residential properties along that way. But I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Quick cross section of the site. We have a thin layer of topsoil, ranges from 3 inches to a foot. Largely, this topsoil layer is clean. We only have a couple areas across the site where that topsoil is impacted. It's quick photos. It's the fill material beneath the topsoil that's contaminated. The fill generally usually starts around a foot and extends to anywhere from 2 feet to about 11 feet across the site. So it's really very variable fill. Some photos of the fill. Right beneath the fill material, you can see on the right side of that photo is a thick layer of blasted rock. I'm not really sure if this was blasted rock from on-site or from off-site that was brought in-site, but beneath that fill is this really thick layer of rock. And then beneath the rock is the native sand and gravel that was originally at the site. That's a photo of the native sand. And beneath the native sand, the bedrock. It's a downhill view of one of our borings. Groundwater at the site is thankfully pretty deep. South portion of the site is about 15 feet below grade surface. It's in the blasted rock, and the north portion of the site is actually within the bedrock, about 25 feet deep. So this project started when the New Lebanon was thinking about building a swing space on the lower portion of the recreational area. Initial sampling found some arsenic and metals in soils. We were hired and engaged to assess that area, which expanded to assessing the entire fields. Once we did that, we found a few hot spots, lead, PCBs, chlordane, which is a pesticide, that we realized that we had to do some more work here. So after the initial assessment, those 3 dots in the upper portions were the hot PCB hits at 1 foot below grade surface. We spent a good amount of time delineating those initial hotspots. We were hoping that this was isolated areas of maybe fill that was brought into small areas, and therefore we can try to limit our remediation to just focused areas and not site-wide. Unfortunately, we realized we weren't getting to endpoints. Our sidewall samples kept on being impacted, so we decided to do a more comprehensive assessment. So every boring, every dot you just saw come up on the screen is a sample we collected of the topsoil and within the fill beneath it. The red dots that just showed up on the screen are all the areas where we found PCBs of 1 part per million. So ultimately, we determined that the fill is variable and it's across the entire site. There are some areas where it's thinner and not as impactful, but essentially, whenever they built this school, all the fill was used across the site, unfortunately.
Can we stop for just 1 second?
Yeah.
Have you sampled outside that grid closer to the building?
Yep. So let me do that in about 10 seconds.
Okay.
So through iterative process with the state, DEP, and EPA, they've asked us to reassess, delineate more. So to the intent of time, I don't need to go into every single thing we've done, but essentially we've been asked to do more and more vertical, horizontal delineation at most of these points. And not only for PCBs, we've been doing assessments for heavy metals, pesticides, herbicides, VOCs, semi-volatile organics, more comprehensive assessments. One of their requests was to do some delineation away from the field itself. So you can see some borings that are coming up along the edges towards the school, and you see some borings going away towards the Holly Hill transfer facility and again to the northeast. Thankfully, as we move away from the fields, the PCB concentrations drop off. The green dots mean we're clean, the red dots mean we're dirty. So if you look at the outer edge, the pointer's not working, but the outer edge are all green, essentially meaning that our theory was correct. As you get away from the fill, the PCBs dissipate.
Which one is it green?
So when you go back on that, so here, these dots come up, you have red towards the field and they're green.
Yeah, there's the ones, there's green with the white circle around it.
White circles, all these.
Yeah.
That's all good. Yep.
Do you guys know if the school, I mean, I've never seen, I've seen this presentation like 5 times, but in different versions of it, as you guys have.
That's right. As we get more and more data, we
Yeah. So the question that I have is I've never seen the one where they showed it as a 1941 and it was, I've never seen that slide before. So, which was interesting, it begs the question, like, I don't know, the grade there is kind of, the way the school's, it's on a mound, right? It's up from the street, and then it kind of has one side, and then it dips down into a parking lot, so it's all uneven. My question is, I always understood this problem to be in the fields. I knew it started in the yellow, that was where they first found the lead and something else. And then it started coming up the hill, and the next thing you know, we were in the fields. It begs the question to me, though, that wasn't natural land underneath the school, was it? That was filled, was that filled too?
under the building itself.
Yeah.
Based on the aerials and topographic maps we've looked at, the school looks like it was built on the native material, not on this blasted rock in the fill.
So this is just going up at the back of the school to the,
Based on what we know right now, yes. We have not done any deep borings in the school itself.
because this is the same story, by the way, we heard at Greenwich High School. Like, the fields in the back are all fill, and the front of the school was built on bedrock, therefore no contamination. Well, that turned out not to be true. So it just, I'm not looking for more work. But at the same time, if we're gonna do this, it's like, get the complete picture all at once. And it looks like you guys, after years of doing this, because you've been at this now, not you guys, but with the state, with back and forth, this is what, year 3, year 4? Isn't this?
We're probably 3.5.
Yeah, so it sounds like, is the takeaway we now have a full delineation? Full is a relative term, right?
So full delineation, no, just because
Sufficient.
we do enough what the regulators ask us to do.
Sure.
As of right now, the request to delineate or do any sampling under the school has not been requested, mostly because the evidence that we do have support the fact that no fill is beneath the school. That said, without doing an investigation, I can't confirm that.
I'm not looking for more. I'm just trying to, it's one of these things of do it once and then be done with it. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
All right. So we also, this is again for the regulators, but the yellow dotted circles you see appearing over the yellow are samples or borings where we collected sampling for all citrus concerns, not just PCBs. Although the driver here is PCBs, the fill is, as you can imagine, contaminated with other contaminants of concern, but PCBs will be the driver for the remediation. And this little tag map to show you what other contaminants we have: PCBs, pesticides, PB is lead, AS is arsenic, semi-volatile organics. So the main purpose of this slide is to show that we do have contaminants of concern above regulatory levels across the entire site. We also were asked by the state to install and sample for groundwater monitoring wells. So those 4 borings that showed up on the figure are the monitoring well locations. Thankfully, we've sampled those wells and the results are below regulatory standards. So that was very good news for us. Some additional site considerations. As I mentioned, it's the urban fill material that was imported to the site. It's the main source of contamination. The site is in a GB area, which essentially means that the water's not being used for potable purposes. No one's drinking the water. Same thing within 500 feet of the site. And thankfully, there's no risks to ecological communities identified so far. No streams, no nesting birds or foraging animals in the fields. We've also done remedial alternatives analysis at the request of the regulators. This has been a iterative process. We started at 7, it increased to 10 after meeting with DEP and EPA. It's now at 6. Now that we've determined that it is a site-wide issue and not a hotspot remediation approach, it's now at 6 remedial alternatives. So I'm going to go through those real quick. The first alternative and the most expensive would be to remove all the fill across the site. So that's averaged up to 5 feet, as deep as 11 feet. This is something that we're hopeful is never going to be considered. However, we had to evaluate it. It's a total removal of 103,000 tons of soil plus. It would take 160 days, construction days, and cost about $23 million. Keep in mind, as I outlined some costs in these slides, these are subject to change based on a lot of variable unit rates. So there's 10 to 15 to 20% range both ways when I talk about costs.
Can I just ask a question there with respect to when you're referring to costs, and you're saying this is the remediation, and that's, I see excavation and removal, but what about putting back in?
So what I'm going over right now is restoring to current conditions.
Okay.
Grass fields, replacing the current conditions.
Okay.
I'll go over in a little bit what the options are for potential artificial turf as well. So at the individual alternatives, I have a slide that just goes over notable remedial considerations. These are mostly for the regulators, but I can go over them real quick. This one is the most comprehensive. You're taking all the fill out, so it's going to comply with all the regulations. You're likely not going to need a land use restriction because everything's gone. 160 days, but this would have significant adverse impacts to the community. It would take a long time, a lot of truck traffic, dust mitigation, traffic issues. Remedial alternative number 2.
Can you go back?
Yeah.
What's that last one mean?
Significant adverse community impacts. Essentially, that's just going to have the most impact on neighboring communities from the perspective of idling trucks, driving in and out of the site. You're going to have significant dust mitigation members. Obviously, we're incorporating truck washing into any of these remedial alternatives, but the potential for soil and erosion controls is more of an issue with longer construction projects. So remedial alternative number 2 was excavating all fill down to 4 feet. So this would be accepted under the Connecticut regulations. That's the requirement by default from the RSR, the 4-foot cut, replaced with 4 foot of clean. This would also be expensive. You're doing 72,000 tons of removal, take 100 days remediation for approximately $16 million. Likely comply with both EPA and DEP with some exemptions to the EPA regs. Not as much adverse community impacts, but still have community impacts. Alternative number 3, and so as we go to each alternative, they get less and less comprehensive, you'll notice. Alternative number 3 is 2-foot cut across the entire site. So the costs go down, your soil removal goes down to 44,000 tons, 70 days for remediation for a cost of $10.5 million. So this alternative would need exemption or variances from both EPA and DEP, i.e. 2-foot cap is not prescriptively approved under the RSRs, so we will need variance from DEP. EPA would comply with most of EPA's regulatory risk-based criteria. However, we wouldn't accept exemptions for sampling and endpoint sampling.
When you say 70 days of construction, right? Let's see, June 15th, July 15th. It could be done over the summer, right?
So the intent, if we're not using the access and exit from the Western Middle School, and I'll go over this in a couple slides, but we could use the exit and exit at the back of the site. If that's the case, I don't think we're exactly restricted to just summer construction periods.
I gotta tell you, I can't imagine a parent who's gonna want it. I mean, I'm just gonna say it out loud, because somebody's gonna say it, so it's just worth saying now. There's not a parent I know who's gonna send their kid to that school while we're dragging out tons and tons of dirt with dust flying all over the place. It just, I don't care whether you guys, I'm sure there will be, it's done in a way that would make it safe, but I can't imagine the community, I'd be shocked if the community would say, yeah, sure, I'll send my kid to a school while that's going on.
So that would be a debate and communication between
Right,
the
right.
affected community and the board.
Right. I mean, I don't want to be, you know, we have to be real about this. Anyway, okay.
Remedial alternative number 5 is, again, less and less of a cut is a,
4 was 2 feet.
That was 3.
I'm sorry, so you're right, I skipped one. Number 4 is also 2 feet. However, instead of removing, I'll go back. We're also removing the PCBs above 10 ppm regardless of depth. That's the last sentence there. Number 4, we're only removing to 50 ppm. So there's very little difference between 3 and 4. 3 was 10.5, 4 is 10 million. So it's $500,000 for chasing all impacts of 10 parts per million. This was something that the EPA asked us to evaluate.
Why would they ask that?
10 parts per million is a standard that the EPA uses for cleanup under their regulations.
Oh, so you guys went in with the lower standard and they said if you raised it to this. It would be weird they would ask you to go to a lower standard. It didn't happen that way, right?
Well, they asked us to evaluate removing the 10 and then moving to 50 and what the delta would be. Essentially, what was evaluated based on that assessment was that the marginal increase of cost removing from 10 to 50 is probably worth it. It's only a few $100,000.
Does Deep share the same point of view as the EPA, or do they diverge at some point?
They have parallel thinking on some of these items, but their regulations are not parallel. They would both need to be willing to accept some sort of risk-based strategy similar to the high school.
I guess based on your dealings with them, not on this project, but other projects, is that something that we should expect?
Sure. I mean, you guys aren't, said another way, you guys are not making proposals that you don't have, based on your experience, some high probability they're likely to accept. I get your point of, if you take it all out, they have no conditions, hey, great, go do it, you're done. You guys have put in some lower cost things that need some variances to them, right? But you didn't come up with things that they're just gonna say, no way, Jose, but
So
they're not
both,
easily approved.
so both the EPA and DEP have told us that leaving PCBs in place over 1 parts per million is a new concept. So that's why it's largely taken so long for them to evaluate these alternatives, and hence the back and forth process over the years.
Right, okay.
The quickest and cheapest way to remedy this, not cheapest, the quickest and fastest way to remedy this is do something prescriptive to the RSRs, which is a 4-foot cut. We could do that tomorrow, but that's $16 million. So our main intent over the last couple of years has been trying to save the town money by doing something more risk-based, but still providing a protective layer between the contaminants and the affected students.
Okay.
Alternative number 5 is a 1-foot cut plus remediating PCBs above 10 parts per million regardless of depth. Somehow the cost got meted, but it'll come up in the future slides, so bear with me. So this is alternative that will need variances from both EPA and DEP. Now that the high school project is really close to getting a decision rendered on their proposed remediation, we feel more confident that the Western Middle School project, which is a similar issue, would hopefully be looking at something closer to a 1-foot cut for artificial turf and a 2-foot cut if it's being restored to current condition, which is grass. And remedial alternative. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, which one, I get the one you're gonna talk about, artificial turf, but you didn't get there yet, right?
Right.
Which was the one with 2-foot cut with grass?
4, 3, and 4 were both 2-foot cuts with grass.
And they're 10 million and?
10.5 and 10,
The difference is, Peter, the parts over 10.
Okay, but,
So starting in
so
number,
this two, I'm sorry, and the 5 is a 1-foot,
that's correct.
which that'd be like a big push to get.
If we're restoring to grass, very unlikely to get, yes.
Would you imply that similar to what we're doing at the high school now with field 6 and 7?
So at the high school, you're about to hopefully get approved a 1-foot cut in grass areas, or in artificial turf areas, but 2-foot cut in grass areas. And then the last alternative we evaluate is a 1-foot plus removal of PCBs above 50, regardless of depth. Very similar cost, so 6.5. I'll come up the next slide. And very similar variances we would need from both DEP and EPA, but much shorter 35-day construction schedule.
That's 1 foot with turf.
With grass. But all 1 through 6 were all alternatives based on grass. Bear with me.
Sorry.
So this slide summarizes all the alternatives based on restoring to grass. So starting with 23 million, going to 6 million. So alternatives 3 and 4 are 2-foot cuts to grass, and 5 and 6 are 1-foot turfs to grass. Let me jump ahead, I'll get to okay, I'll come back. So this is kind of a summary slide to present high-level differences between a grass-based restoration remediation and a turf-based remediation. Essentially, the differences are that in grass, you have a 2-foot cut. If you're doing a 2-foot cut across the entire site, the remediation is about 10 million. Restoration, loam, seeding, reinstalling the baseball diamond and the softball diamond, about 500,000, for an estimated total of 10.5.
Just before you go on, does that 10.5 include drainage or I guess plumbing for watering?
It's a new irrigation system, yeah.
Proper drainage, proper
That's
irrigation?
right.
Okay.
So the drainage system needed for artificial turf is a much more robust system. So that's why it's going to cost more expensive. But, so let's say you're doing artificial turf at a 1-foot cut, your remediation goes down to 6.5 million, but your restoration for the fields goes up to about 2.2 million for a total cost of 8.7. What this means is,
a rich field as well.
what this means is that,
$2 million to have grass.
yeah, it's about $1.8 million less to install an artificial turf field.
$2 million for grass. Okay.
So another thing we're actively working on is, so this is a slide showing the picture of the same access way to pedestrian walkway. The intent is to, some earthwork will be needed, but make the slope maybe a little bit less, like about a 10% slope right now, which is still fine for trucks to drive up and down, but some earthwork will be needed here. But the main hurdle for us is that ideally the trucks want to travel south to get the 95 easier. The Holly Hill transfer station has an existing easement with the bakery that allows them to drive their trucks along that passageway. So we were talking with Amy, I've talked to the transfer station. We still need to kind of coordinate with the bakery and figure out what it's going to need, but essentially it's going to be an amendment to that easement.
What does, you guys talked to the bakery already? What do they say about this?
We have not spoken to the bakery. I mean, it's not going to be us, it's going to be someone at the town.
No, I understand that, but I mean, is there, you ever seen a situation where if you're dragging this much contaminated material from site, then an adjoining property objects? I mean, it's one thing to have, I should say this. It's an interesting thing when a individual homeowner objects. When a commercial business with an enormous legal department objects, that's a horse of a different color.
So it's certainly something that discussion
Did
is
you ever come across that before?
Where they reject an easement? Sure.
No, not reject an easement. Is there a provision where, when you build a house in this town, or you want a variance of something, like which we would need to ask for, we need a variance from current regulations to do what we're talking about, right? That, I presume, would open a door for someone to easily object, right? So, now they're in a position where they can object to our plan. The question I have is if you have a commercial business like that, right? I mean, they're making food, for goodness sakes, right? Have you ever seen anything like that where adjoining commercial property objects to a plan like this?
No, dude, have you seen anything?
Maybe it's never happened.
It would be discussed. We have to make them feel comfortable that the controls we're putting in place would not affect their business.
Right.
So
A couple of things that are always required on the remediation, but one, public notice, so you do have the abutters are well aware of it. And dust control is always something that, always a big issue, and dust monitoring devices are put out in the field and everything. Dust suppression practices are are part of the requirements of the contractor. And particularly this kind of open remediation, that they're going to have, the contractor is going to have strict dust control measures.
And the truck washing station that you typically see on construction, the ones that you can install, they're very robust. They have water that comes out, they have drainage that gets pumped out regularly. So we have to convince them that the controls that will be put in place would be sufficient, but we're kind of at the preliminary stage of those conversations. I think that really comes to the end. Go ahead.
Mr.
So, can I ask, I know it's impossible to guess, but assuming that the high school was given a go, that plan was given a go in the next month or two, this is then next in line, in theory, and you would then go back to the EPA/Connecticut and say, we're going forth with these 6 options, or we're going to then tell them, we're thinking option 4 or 5.
So between now and then, we would need input from the town to understand what they guys want to do for final restoration, if it's grass or if it's artificial turf. But yeah, exactly right. We would want to piggyback on the success that the high school project had and incorporate a lot of other remedial strategies for the high school into the Western Middle School.
Well, so if I could just ask what Peter's formulating his question, what's the fastest we could actually come to an agreement with EPA and DEEP on a plan, just a single plan?
Attorney, for God's sakes, I didn't
I'm exactly going to ask that question.
So the fastest and, easiest is to do something prescriptive to the regulations.
Okay. Knowing that we're probably not going to go down that road, and that we are going to look towards something more akin to what we've done at the high school, what's the time frame?
Well, the timeframes, particularly with the PCB issues, are very hard to predict. The person at EPA is dealing with PCB issues every day and many of them become very critical from a public health point of view. So it could take months and months and months to get a response from her in some instances. The other thing that we have going on here is that the PCB concentrations that can be normally allowed underneath a protective cap of some sort, 2 feet of earth material, whatever, are different with EPA than they are with DEP. And actually DEP is the more stringent. So you have to get DEP to agree, and DEP hasn't necessarily agreed to those low levels in the past.
So I know for the high school, we're part of a voluntary program. Is that the same path we're pursuing for this project?
So the intent, since we were involved, was to try to avoid getting to the program because of the struggles that the high school had. And I would say over the last couple of years, management at the DEP has changed quite drastically. So we're hoping that that is not something we need to move forward with for the Metro Middle School. Jane, Lauren, McCarter English is currently speaking with them and trying to understand what that mechanism will be to move forward to remediation. So the high school is in the voluntary remediation program, which allows them to ask for DEP approval and variances in accordance with the regulations. The Western Middle School currently is not in a program, which means that there's no formal mechanism for them to review and approve our work plans unless they do it outside the auspices of the RSRs.
Are you better to be in the program or not?
So if you're in a program, you're held to more stringent assessment, delineation, and it's a more timely process to fully evaluate your site. They may, like the high school may ask us to evaluate dumpsters, fuel oil tanks. Yeah, a lot of
The entire site.
while our intent has been to get this field ready for students and kids to be back playing on them, I think entering the program, while it may be necessary, at this point, we're not 100% sure that's the path we need to go.
If the DEP and EPA give us variances and approve of what plan we put together, does that sort of take the responsibility off us of making the safe decision? Is that generally in other operations you've worked on, does that basically cover the decision of the group as long as the EPA and DEP actually give us a variance?
So both the EPA and DEP would make you guys do public hearings, and the public would need to be on board with whatever remedial strategy is implemented. So it's a give and take, but essentially.
You had a different question.
Ultimately, once they had the public hearing and granted us the variance, then basically we're kind of covered.
Yeah, if you get both those regulators approving the remedial approach, for the most part, they're evaluating risks and concerns for the affected public and students. So if they're on board with it, I feel like you guys would be the approved remedy.
Good.
I think from a regulatory point of view, you're covered. From a third-party liability, you're not at all.
Yeah, that was your question, right, Joe?
No, that was more just what
From a regulatory.
More what responsibilities we have in making a decision. If the EPA and DEP make a decision and approve the variance, then we've done what we're supposed to do.
Yeah, you've got authorization to do.
Yeah, but, I understood. I understood what you're saying. We're not automatically indemnified just because we met the regulation, right? So, but, I mean, that's a question for the legal department. I guess I just wanted to connect the two dots between the high school. So, if I hear this right, the theory is, I'm gonna go do field 7 at the high school. I'm not even clear what that project, how exactly that project is, but the idea would be, I would have a foot of fill and then a carpet, which is the artificial turf. And then in the areas that are adjacent, of which I do not have artificial turf, because it's not a part of the field, spectator area, whatever, I have to pull out to 2 feet. And I'm gonna put in clean fill on top of 2 feet. So, I think so what you guys are saying is, if I can get that approved for the high school, right, I'm gonna potentially, the strategy you've pursued is say, let me just try and see if I can get the same thing that you've approved over here for a different site within the town of Greenwich. Is that essentially the?
That's right.
And then you're suggesting that if you went that road, the projected cost of that would be 8.7 million. If you didn't like, what you're telling us is, guys, if you don't want artificial turf, which is your strategy at the high school, because that's what already exists, right? And you wanted to put in grass, you couldn't get away with a foot. You'd have to go to at least 2, and maybe you could get the approval for that. But what I hear you saying is, maybe you didn't say this, it's a question. Is the theory that if this is approved once, it's more likely to get approved the second time?
Yeah.
Is that what you've seen in your experience, or do they come back and go, nice try, but it's totally different site, totally different circumstances?
So both DEP and EPA have told us that the high school project will be the first project in the state to have successfully accomplished such an remedial alternative.
So they're thinking a lot about the precedent.
That's why it's taken so long for the high school, because the precedent they're setting.
Okay, and can I just ask for a clarification? The project we're talking about at the high school remediation, I don't know if you've seen this, maybe you guys created it.
That's AECom, not Lanyon, but
Sorry.
maybe I'll defer to Tony.
It's remediation area 1, field 6 and 7. The red, green, yellow, purple, and orange is not a part of what we're talking about. We're comparing this to what's in this blue on this chart. Is that correct? Yes.
Ms. Hirsch.
So I know no matter what you do, or whichever remediation plan we look towards, you're gonna have to put together a health and safety plan either way. How likely is it, the further down we go for removal, that we might find other issues or things that we bump into that would cause a pause in remediation plans and or a cost increase?
If the strategy is to go down to 2 foot, and we're taking endpoint samples at 2 feet, the results of those samples will dictate whether we need to go further. But generally speaking, there's really not much more we can find at this point that's going to really affect during construction. The worst of it's all we already know about.
And then the other question I had was, how many other projects have you worked on with this level of soil removal? And what was the what did you put in place to protect neighbors, students, etc.?
So we do projects like this all over the country. Probably 100 active projects, similar soil management activities as we speak. You have perimeter monitoring stations. On a project like this, you'll probably have 5 stations at the perimeter of the construction zones. They're monitoring particulates in the air. The idea is, and those are monitored on a real-time basis. So when you're in the field, if you have an exceedance of a particulate matter, one of those monitoring stations, the field engineer will get an alert on their phone. They'll know what station it's coming from, and they can tell the contractor right then to stop work and to implement dust mitigation measures. For a project like this, dust mitigation is the primary public concern.
Other discussion? I know I personally want to get this done as fast as humanly possible, so if there's a route to get it done in a reasonable manner akin to what we're doing at the high school, I'd be really interested in doing that. But
Yeah, I don't
leave it to others.
understand what's next.
I guess, are you looking for direction from us? I'm looking at Tony. You're looking for direction from us as to which plan, or?
We've talked about how aggressive we need to be to get this moving and how important it is to the community. We're really waiting on the yes or no at the high school. I mean, and once we get that, then.
That's one part, is getting that consensus about high school, but also understanding from the town, what do you want your final restoration to be? What we don't want to do is submit a plan to the regulators and then come back later and say, no, we want artificial turf. That's going to put us back at square one. So we need a decision on restoration.
Ms. Kowalski.
So I think this is a question for Tony, if why do we have to wait for a decision on the high school? I mean, are we going to have to end this to go through public comment and get the sense of whether or not we want to turf a middle school versus grass in the middle school and start that process as opposed to waiting? Because I feel like we're sitting idly by and we don't know how long it's going to take for the high school. Can't we just move kind of in parallel tracks?
At least from my perspective, where we are right now, we're so close on the high school, we hope, I mean, we're planning to be turf this summer. So, so we're so close to that, it would be nice to know if that's susceptible, so that we don't have lots and lots of community conversation about an option that's not even reasonable.
The public comment for that was over February, what's the meeting?
February 1st.
Yeah. We were all at the meeting like 2 weeks ago, so I think it's.
But I take your point, and I guess maybe be thinking about an action plan where you reach out to the Western community, the neighbors, hold a forum there, have Megan present the limited options, hopefully, that we're looking at, get feedback, and then we would immediately put it on an agenda and be able to take that out.
Yeah, I just think if there's something that we can do to start moving it along with respect to getting community input, regardless of how the high school turns out, but at least we can get through that phase of it to keep it flowing.
Yeah,
But I guess to Tony's point, we do not want to disrupt the apple cart that's going on in terms of the pending approval, I think is what.
that's my question. I'm where you are, but I'm
But
on the, I'm wondering if we're holding this like super fragile origami thing that the kid made and, now it's like, oh my God, don't touch it. That's what I don't know. I'm with you, Karen. By the way, this thing's been going on now for so long, it's absurd. But, so I'm itchy like you are, but at the same time, if this thing all hinges upon that other plan being approved, whoever's managing that plan, I don't want to do anything unless those people say, go ahead. Because I don't want to upset that apple cart. I don't want to get in a bad loop with the regulator.
No, I agree, I don't want to get in a bad loop either. I guess what I'm missing is how is having discussions to figure out what's the best thing to do at Western, it was not intended. There's a lot of fields going on. I guess I'm not linking how discussions about Western upset the apple cart at the high school.
Maybe I don't understand this properly. They've gone into the regulators with a plan that has never been done before. So if the regulator approves it, the regulator is actually approving an implementation of their regulations with approved variances, not, hey, here's just you, right? So and we have to figure out whether they will actually do that. They've never done it before, so it's like setting precedents. I'm not a lawyer. For you lawyers, it seems to me it's like going into court in two courts at the same time, rather than waiting for one to say yes or no on the precedent, and then going into the second court, or going to the same court again beforehand. I don't know what the right strategy is there.
I
don't
want to interrupt, but I'm not talking about going in to get approval, facing and trying to backstop the regulators against each other if you get group 1 or group 2. I'm talking about a community component. What does the community want with respect to the 6 proposals that are up?
So, but that was.
Sure.
So that was sort of the purpose of the public hearing that we went to, was 2 weeks ago now. And there was this guy, Jeff Wilcox, there from Connecticut, and he sort of heard from the community then. But the community then was told to send in any more public comment if they wanted to, and that is going to stop tomorrow. And so I don't know then what his response time is from the public comment ending, but I assume that's up to him.
Depends on the level of comments and what they need to respond to, yeah. And another element to the Western Middle School is what we talked about earlier, is whether or not we need to go into the voluntary remediation program or not, or there's some sort of mechanism where we can still apply an environmental land restriction on the site without being in the program. So that's something that Jane Warren is actively looking at too.
Ms. Hirsch.
So I know each of the remediation plans, depending on the depth that we go down, discussed how long it would take to remove and remediate the site. Is there any difference on timing based on whether we use natural grass or artificial turf on top? Does that change the timing?
So for each of the alternatives I went over with construction days, that included the backfill and planting of loam. For an artificial turf, there's going to be added time to the schedule to place, the geotextile fabric, the drainage that you need within the stone layer beneath the field itself, and to then roll the actual artificial turf. And the actual time also depends on the type of artificial turf you guys want. There's dozens of options, types of product, so it's kind of variable.
I guess grass though also takes time, right? Unless they're coming and rolling it out, but that still even takes time to set.
Yeah, for a site like this, I'm not sure, David, they'd probably do like a hydro mulch, which is actually pretty quick.
I might just add that you have to really get it done at exactly the right time, otherwise you have to wait like until spring. And if you just look at even with our Havemeyer project, trying to time that, we've prepared that community for that small field to be closed the entire year, just by the time it's planted, and then making sure it's really healthy before you let all those little feet start trampling on it.
All right, any other discussion? Mr. Sheriff?
This item,
Yes, on this item.
which you guys won't be able to ask. The item is update on GHS fields. Can someone explain remediation area 5 on this chart? That's in Cardinal Stadium. In the prior presentations, we were sure there was no remediation required in these, within that site.
Diesel fuel. You said there was an old generator engine, or somebody did some car automobile work in there. Diesel fuel.
So that's the only remediation that's required there.
So it's limited in scope.
Is that, do you know?
That's what I understand. Heard the same thing Joe did. We talked about that at the public hearing.
Yeah, I couldn't. So when is that gonna be remediated?
Summer. If approved.
Who has to approve it?
It's part of the overall plan.
Just the stuff we were talking about.
It's by the concession stand, Peter, if you're trying to.
Yeah, that's
where.
Oh, I was just
No.
gonna say, it's about the parking, that,
I bet it has to, not outside the nest, needs to be generated, that's what it is.
okay.
One thing with the regulators, a licensed environmental, the high school's in a program, and LEP has been designated as the lead for that program, I believe, or is the state. I think ultimately, the LEP can oversee that type of remediation without DEP getting involved so much, because it's not requiring any variance from the regulations. The PCBs are different, and the PCBs are also regulated by the EPA, so it's more involved.
All right, if there's no other discussion, thank you, gentlemen, we appreciate the update.
Thank you very much.
Presentation, thank you.
We'll move on to the next discussion item, which is the update on the special education consultant devising seminar process. Dr. Jones.
What we've provided for you tonight is really just making sure the board has all the information that is posted on the web. What's on the first page there was just the notice of the first meeting. That's the task force that met when they were setting up the process. It's been one meeting. And then behind that, you can see who are the members of that task force. We also have the minutes, just if anybody was interested in looking to see what was discussed at that task force meeting, in looking at the areas where we were really looking at strengths and weaknesses, and what some of the next steps were that were noted in the minutes on the 19th. And again, that was the anonymous interviews, another meeting that is still scheduled, I believe, on February 19th. I think it's still that day. Yep. So that's just kind of, we wanted you to be aware that all of this is on the web, it has been on the web, the committee information, and again, it's only been one meeting. Then what you're looking at behind is just how people registered through the online registry to be able to have their interviews. And I know there've been over about 100, I don't know the exact number, at least that's my understanding. And then what you're looking at is the task force process. If you're wanting to just know a little bit more, again, you can kind of read about that. And task force minutes, the Devising seminar consultants actually took minutes as well. It's kind of like their reporting. They're a little bit different than what our school minutes would be, so we really have kind of two versions. And theirs is set up more where you can see the results, process, relationships. We are in the process now. They are collecting, writing the report that, what did they hear? And it's really focused on, when you look at the minutes, it's focused on key areas. And these are areas that were really from community input, from what we recognize as a challenge, was looking at evaluation, assessment, PPT meetings, implementation of IEP documents, getting into RTI. So what are some of our parents' experiences, good, bad, with those components of special education? And so we're hoping that after they do their final report, we'll hear what was the input, and is it across the board that a lot of parents feel like that intervention process is not working? And I expect that we're definitely going to probably hear that just based off the many conversations that I've had. So this is, again, just letting you know what's out there and how the conversations have been framed. And they will be coming to a board meeting. They would like to come and update the board here personally. So once all of that work is a little bit farther down the road.
Discussion, Ms. Hirsch?
I know at the last board meeting, there was some public commentary and feedback in regards to some of the interviews with Key 2E. And I know the planning group has selected these 3 subject areas: interventions, evaluations, PBT meetings, and also the IEP implementation. But there's sort of concerns that even amongst those 3 items, it's not the complete scope. And so when parents are coming to speak at these interviews, I feel like there's this misconception, and I feel like you've done such a great job of putting this into place really quickly to try to at least address some of the things that we can do to move forward before doing an audit. And it's a shame that parents who have waited this long feel this level of frustration, because I feel like there seems to be some sort of miscommunication, and when parents are going in and they're reporting that they're even when they're talking about these specific topics and they're mentioning things that are in regards to administrators or how these meetings are run, they're being told by the Key 2E interviewers that they're not going to be marking these things down because this scope doesn't cover it, except these things are integral to some of these meetings and some of the reason that parents feel frustration. And I don't want parents who finally feel some forward movement to walk away feeling this level of frustration, because it does seem to me be a miscommunication, either in Key 2E understanding that they should be taking notes, at least just so that you're aware that these are the outside discussions, or parents just knowing in advance that the specific scope is very limited. I just don't want this to end up being parents walking away feeling that they were frustrated and not being told the truth as to what this purpose was. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on how we can handle that.
Yeah, I mean, I think all the interviews are done now. I think they're actually complete, I think. Oh, but
I know I'm still
February. You're right. Yeah, they are back up.
I actually posed that concern to the 2 people who were doing the interviews, and they responded that everyone who asked to be interviewed was sent an email that described the scope and parameters of the subjects to be described, as well as a copy of the task force notes. The 3 topic areas, interventions, evaluations, and PPT meetings, and IEP implementation, represent the scope of any district's special education process, programs, and services. When people who were interviewed first sat down for the interview, Cassie and I, this is Joyce wrote this to me, asked them if they had any questions about the subjects to be discussed and about the interview process. The devising seminar process was explained to each person interviewed, and they were asked if they had any questions for clarification. Cassie and I reiterated with each person that the purpose of this part of the devising seminar process was to identify issues and concerns that cause conflicts or disputes between the district or school staff and parents in the areas of special education. When one thinks about the sequence and scope of special education services, the three subject areas, interventions, evaluations and PPT meetings, and IEP implementation, cover the complete scope of special education. If there were other subjects that those interviewed wished to discuss, those subjects were outside the area of the devising seminar process.
So, if I can just add.
Hang on, Megan.
Obviously, we had public comment where people did not feel that, and I think, we've tried to put out in our digest and put out information, but if people didn't understand that, then I would agree with you, there's miscommunication on whatever level. And I think in the three areas, I'm hopeful that they will actually be able to give us a feel for the culture and climate if they interviewed 100 people, and if they didn't take down individual comments and the board is wanting that information, I think when they're here, they should be able to share that with us, so.
I'll just say, I haven't had my interview yet. They've had to reschedule me a few times for some reason or another. And it wasn't clear to me that some of these things were outside of the scope. And additionally, Mary, what you just said was they sent you a letter, information as to what they discussed when people go in for the interview. And one of the things you specifically said was issues with communications with school staff. I was trying to jot it down as you were saying it. And I think that's what parents are saying, that some of these processes, when they're going through with this, interventions or evaluations or PPT meetings, the communication is actually a key element. Parents don't know what their rights are, whatever it may be. So it's shocking to me that this isn't being noted in these interviews. And I know parents are asking to get a copy of the reports, or the notes that were taken in their meeting, and finding things that are germane to this being left out. And that really does concern me, only in the fact that we don't want this group of individuals to sort of feel not heard.
Ms. Olson.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. First, Dr. Jones said the data will be there by February 19th, but I understand from special education parents that a lot of the key to ed meetings are scheduled out to mid-February. I know that Ms. Hirsch just said she hasn't had one yet, an interview, and I know that several are scheduled all the way out to, I think, as late as February 18th. So I'm just trying to understand, again, I guess I question the validity if interviews are going to be scheduled out through and past the 18th, how data will be presented by the 19th, because not to be pessimistic about how quick Greenwich Public Schools turns data around, but I think one day is a little bit overly eager or optimistic. Am I mistaken, or are those dates correct?
Yeah, I don't think they're intending on having that report like the next day they finish interviews. I think it's probably likely March or April before they'll be back, but I'd have to clarify that with them, that they will have to have all of the interviews before they actually can put the report together.
This says February 19th, though. When I'm looking at what I'm looking at right now, it says February 19th. So that's why I thought you said all the interviews were completed, but I know the interviews are scheduled out all the way up through the 18th, so I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, that's the next meeting for the stakeholder group.
Again, when they report out on the interviews, they're just giving transcripts. So if they have interviews the day before, they will just add those notes and transcripts to the ones that the task force are getting the next day. They're not analyzing them. It's just strictly, here are the notes from the interviews. So
I'm sorry, I was asking Dr. Jones, but I had another question for Dr. Jones, actually. Who exactly picked the committee, and what were the criteria?
What we were asked to do on the committee was to try to have a balanced committee with, I'm just trying to find the name, so I was on the committee, obviously. Mary's on that committee, but then we have parents, we have teachers, administrator, and it was balanced, and it's supposed to not be too big or too small. And the parents are parents that may be happy with us and may see some challenges with our system right now. So it was trying to make sure we had good voices around the table to be able to provide input.
Did you provide transparency to the public as to who would be on the committee?
It's actually been on the website ever since the committee was.
No, I understand what I'm saying. Before the committee was picked, did you provide transparency to the public? Like, was a call made by volunteers that were not necessarily selected by the administration to be on that committee? That's my question. Beforehand, before the committee was picked, was there transparency? Is my question.
I would say not in that regard, in that we did have our PTEC representative for special ed, which is, she's actually sitting here tonight. She was on there, as well as some parents that we had heard from. We also wanted to make sure we have a pre-K parent on there, but then we also have parents, with children that are older. And from the staff perspective, it was having a high school teacher, making sure we had an elementary teacher, psychologist. Again, it was the different roles that we were asked, and it's putting a committee together just to have input. The committee really only meets like 2 or 3 times.
So you're saying that would be a lack of transparency, though, in that regard, to the public?
You can consider it that way. I don't. I feel like we were trying to put a balanced committee together that we were asked to do because I wouldn't want to send out an email and have 100 people that want to be on a committee and we can only choose 12 or 13, and then we're trying to interview people. We felt like we were really being, very understanding about the balance that they were looking for on this committee.
Mr. Sheriff.
That's for now. I don't have any questions right now. I'm sure I'll have more pop up.
Mr. Sheriff.
Tony, can you just remind me from a process perspective, to Megan's point, by the way, it's 10 administrators for 5 on the public. I've always suspected committees that are constructed that way. But, by the way, I'm glad I read some of these names I obviously know very well. Jennifer, thank you. Cricket, Audra, so I'm pleased to see that some of the people we put on there are people who have really some of the most prominent concerns, but here or there. Can you just remind me, the interviews are blind and private?
They're off-site, they're not held on any school
And
property.
and is there any GPS staff in those?
They can interview if the teacher wanted to sign up to go be interviewed.
No, I'm sorry. If they're doing an interview
Oh, no.
with a parent, there's no staff, right?
No, there's no staff, and I have no idea who interviewed. We don't have.
And then the way they're bringing back the data, it's completely, you talk about transcripts, it's completely blind
Yes,
and it's scrubbed?
yes.
Okay.
Now, I haven't seen them, so I'll reiterate that to them.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I mean, as I say, I was really surprised this was being done. I mean, I've been calling for a very long time a comprehensive review. This obviously costs money. Our answer was, well, we can't do a comprehensive review because it costs money. Now, I'm sure you're gonna tell me this costs a lot less than the more comprehensive review. That wasn't really my point. I warned about this, Tony, and I'm really troubled by what I heard from Mrs. Hirsch, which is we go through this drill with a community that is clearly, if there were a few people out there who were unhappy, I'd be, okay, that's a sample. I will tell you, anecdotally, I could sit there and count it up if I really wanted to, but I hear way too many issues with special education, and they're broad. So that's why I've concluded this isn't an isolated issue of an individual when we're running 1,000 kids through special education. It seems to me. So in an approach that we need, okay, we cannot play this game, which is what I warned has happened before you were here, which is people have tried to run this down very narrow. They try to narrow what the questions will be. They try to narrow who gets asked them. They try to narrow it. And I think we can't approach it this way. We have to approach this open aperture. It has to be a discovery that has to be open aperture. What we hear from the public has to lead us to the next question. I will tell you as an example, when someone says to me these 3 items of the special education process, that may be inside edu-speak, but I will tell you, when you don't have dispute resolution on here, which is one of the most significant issues, in our community, we're not covering the waterfront. So I hope this is gonna be, I just want you to take that on board so that the next time we go back and do this, and I think we're gonna have something to say about the scoping when we do this starting again, I would hope to convince my fellow board members that that approach to that has to be very wide aperture. Anybody who walks in and tells you about something, we have to take that down. Our answer can't be, I'm only here to interview for these 3 things, and I'm going to circumscribe the conversation if you're outside those guardrails. This maybe is a helpful start, and I'm pleased you're doing it, because I'm very interested in quickly, what did you learn? I'm more interested in what exactly are you going to do about it. But then when we go back and do this again, it has some element of maybe this is the pre for that plan. It feels a little bit like do-over to me. It'll have to be a do-over.
So I'm very much where Peter is right now. I guess maybe because we've been doing this for so long, right? And it feels like deja vu all over again. What really bothers me is we say to parents, these are the topical areas we want to talk about. To a parent, it may be completely subjective. They feel like whatever it was they wanted to talk about, they didn't do one of those areas. That should have been taken down. We should have listened to what they have to say. The learnings from that are what we're after. That really is what we're after. So it's a little disturbing that what's coming back to us is probably going to be filtered in some sense. So bothersome. Ms. Hirsch.
I do want to point out that probably the individuals that are coming to speak with their frustrations and also many of those who are speaking in these interviews are those who have had frustrations with our special education programming. And I know that I've spoken to many parents who've had good experiences, their students have been well served. So I do want that to be noted, that I know it's not all doom and gloom, but if you go back to this task force report, it says one of the major areas of concern where results posed challenges was in implementing the IEP. And the relationship challenges, concerns, appears the issues stem largely from communication. Both miscommunication and lack of communication between and among school district staff, parents, and families. So we're doing the exact same thing. It's why, to me, when we're talking about they're sharing concerns, that they're not being reported, it does fall into this area. And I truly do hope that whether it's not necessarily in their notes, they've at least noted that this has been brought up, because it's obvious that if this is what parents are saying is not being reported, it was already, the task force said this is where the area of concern is. It would have supported that piece.
I just want to say this, first of all, this is not costing us anything. This is the first time that this process has been done in special education in the country. They asked us if we'd be willing, as a district, to pilot it. And we put ourselves out there to say that we'd be willing to do it. What you're hearing somewhat is the steps of a process. So the Devising seminar process does involve bringing together the task force, using the task force to identify issues, conducting interviews around those issues. This is what the process is. They will learn from the process what maybe you're telling them, which is if you're going to go through interviews, that you need to either be broader in your questions or narrower in your questions. We opened up the interviews for a period of time. We found that there were too many people who wanted to get times and they had to extend the time. They weren't supposed to do interviews in February, but they wanted to make sure that everybody got an opportunity who wanted to speak to them. They were originally intending to do just face-to-face interviews, but there were people, particularly staff, who couldn't get out of their classrooms who asked if they could do telephone interviews. But I think you're asking it to be more than it was. It is a process that has very specific steps. If we want to do something else to get more information, we can do that. But this was a pilot project that we volunteered for to see if it would work in looking at how do you identify the areas of conflict in special education.
And there is a cost, but it's very low, and it's the travel cost. So when we sign a contract, I think it's around $3,000.
That's okay.
Yeah, I just want you to be aware that if when somebody says,
I think this is the first time I've heard that, I mean, well, we see here that this is their first time doing this, so I'm not sure how we were offered this opportunity, which is wonderful, but I don't think it was ever shared with the parents that we were their,
told that before.
we were their pilot program, and so that sort of lends to the fact that unfortunately we're guinea pigs in some regards. I don't think that was ever explained, and it was never said publicly, and I think that sort of adds to where this miscommunication is coming and the frustration from that.
I can
I don't even know
honestly
what to
tell you,
say.
I have said that in every presentation I've done. I've gone out to do coffees in about 6 or 7 elementary schools and middle schools at this point. I am very clear when I discuss it with people that it's a pilot project.
Mr. Scherer.
I'm sorry, I missed that helpful context, because now I view this thing completely differently. This is a freebie from somebody that somebody offered us, and we took advantage of it. If that was explained that way, I'm sorry, I must have been asleep. And it won't be the first time I'm asleep. But look, I don't want us to walk away with this as bad. I think it's great we're going out and we're interviewing people. I guess I want to underline, and I guess this is Tony, I'm trying to underline this to you, and I'm sure you guys feel beat up about this. But this has been a long-standing thing. It predates you. And, the 8 of us are representatives of the community. That's our role in the organization. And, many of us are hearing about this as a significant issue, a persistent issue, and I think you're probably hearing, and I'm sorry if I'm letting it leak out, I just, on behalf of these children, because, no, you're right, Mrs. Hersham, it's worth underlining. There are lots of kids who are getting great services in the district at the same time, and we can't lose sight of that. But I would argue that our goal needs to be, if we got 1,000 kids, we have to be doing a great job for 1,000 kids. It's not like you can say, oh, well, we missed the flu shot. It's not like that. You're dealing with children, and we need to be 100%, particularly on the kids who are most vulnerable.
I do want to say, I think you're doing, this is we moved quickly with this, and I think that's fantastic, and like Mr. Scherer says, our kids have one shot at this, and when we miss them somewhere along the way, to try to bring them back in, to give this, takes so much longer, and so I think that's where our frustration lies, but I know this is an incredible first step, and I hope that we are able to manage the frustration and miscommunication. It just might be communication to parents, it's finding out.
All right, any further discussion on this? I guess we'll look forward to seeing whatever the results are, and we can all view it through our own lens. All right, with that, strategic plan update. So Mr. Scherer, I see you sending around a document. I noted a recent meeting, you chastised the administration for sharing a document that had not been shared with the public before. So I hope you have copies for those in the room, and that this is going to go on the website.
They're out on the table. Yes, you were right. This is just a primer to what we've discussed and what we're going to discuss, but you're right. We should have prepared this and sent it in.
Paul, if you haven't been out to the table, we'll just take a moment for those in the room if they want to go to the table and get them.
Or you can grab Megan's. She can't read it.
Well, we need more than one. How's that?
They were
Bring
put
back
out
a stack.
right at the start of the meeting, so if you were here already, you missed it.
Something was happening, am I adjourning and coming back for exec session?
No.
We're not finished yet. We're talking about strategic plan. Peter's handed out a document. Peter, any chance you can email it to Megan?
Sure.
No. Peter's going to email it to you, Megan, before he begins the discussion, so that we're all working from the same hymnal.
And it's, there's no new, you'll find there's no new revelations in it, so it's not necessarily new information, it's this consolidation of things we've talked about before. So, Megan, let me just get it.
Thank you.
If you include me on that, I could get it posted tomorrow morning as well, or tonight.
Before you do that, just fix this hole in my last name, there's no C.
Sorry, Karen.
That's okay.
Here, I'm sorry. Don't worry, they add C to mine all the time.
Wait, did we have a board member? That her name is Miss Carol.
Oh. Technically, it's my. Oh, right, it's Gaetan's, this is Gaetan's film, right, husband,
Yes.
right.
Okay.
It's on its way to you, Megan, to your GPS.
So there's 3 slides here. It's just to coalesce what we've discussed before, but put it down on paper, because every time we've been doing this, we've done it verbal. Just in terms of the current status, this is stuff we've talked about before. We have a plan that's expiring in June 2020. The original plan and a theory of action of the core, which was personalized learning. The board established very clear goals and measurements, and that's supported by a technology system. The operational execution plan behind that has modified a few times with changing superintendents, and the current superintendent has been clear that she's looking at that and understanding what everybody is doing. It turns out there are other ad hoc activities around the plan that have been revealed that they're happening throughout the district, and we need to plug them into this process. They're all good. You guys know you appointed a committee. The committee has met. We met last Friday, whatever it was, roughly a week ago. And what we came out of the meeting was a reconfirmation of what we've discussed at the last update, that which you're going to see on a piece of paper, but I've discussed it verbally before, which is we have a strategy development framework laid out. It's designed so that it interlocks the Board of Education, the board itself, and the administration together. It's a joint process. We've talked about this before, community survey and engagement. We'll need to make some decisions about that, so I want to give you an update about that, but we've talked about that before. What we did decide coming out of the last meeting is that individual strategies, and I'll explain that a little bit more, we're going to deliberately have them emanate from the administrators and the educational leaders. That'll really be the start point. What I've said before, the strategic plan is developed really in 2 parts. The board part, which is the highest level with the administrators setting the plan, and then ultimately the administrators have to go away and say, how do I execute this thing? It's when we put the 2 phases together that we have a completed strategic plan. The objective is to complete phase 1 by June 18th. That's our last meeting, by the way, if you didn't know what that date is. And then ask the administration to take over the summer and come back in September. Okay? We've talked about this before. I've articulated this on the next slide, this kind of steps. Just so you know, we're really moving through 6 steps. The first one is current state. That's a very data heavy, kind of where are we? What are we right now as a district, just so everybody's on the same sheet of music. It's getting everybody level set. The next step would be looking at our vision and mission. That is something that you know, PGC particularly knows is in our policies already, so we would be looking at that potentially to either keep it, modify it, update it, come up with something new. But it's really about, what do you want to be and why do we exist? Well, we know why we exist for kids and so on and so forth. The next one would be setting strategic goals. What do we want to achieve? And the current plan that's articulated in that tile system very clearly. So we would be looking at that and saying, do we want to keep that, change that, modify that? The next step, which this has been elaborated in our committee meeting, is we decided if the board really leads on setting strategic goals, doing that with Tony and the staff together, we need to give some space and time. We'll probably have about a month, a little more than a month, where Tony can get together with her staff and they can come up with the ideas, particularly leveraged in an educational context, because they're really the educators, to say, this is the big bets we think as an organization we should place bets on. So they would be proposing those to the board. We would have a joint discussion about them. We would decide collectively if they fit or they don't fit, how we feel about them, so on and so forth. And then once those steps are done, that's all combined into a strategic plan, which is consolidated. You have to check it is it coherent when you put it all together? Is it achievable? And can it be resourced? So if you're not answering those key questions, then you probably don't have the right coherent plan. But the idea would be, we would march through this process, have kind of a strategic plan set through a meeting on the 21st. The committee would work to essentially have that wrapped into a document that then the board could take up and formally vote on the 4th or the 18th. I looked at the agenda plan to lay that out. And that would get us to that point. You wouldn't really have the final strategic plan until Tony and her team went away and looked at the execution part. But we would be at a definitive milestone by the time we execute, I believe in June. And then Tony could work on how are we going to execute this thing, what actually has to happen, how does it need resource. It'll fit quite nicely also because they'll be developing budget over the summer, so they'll be able to be in a resourcing mindset and an operational mindset. We could probably take that up by the 30th of September, dust it off, finish it. That becomes our plan for 2020 through 2025. Now, just in terms of schedule, Mr. Bernstein, March 5 works, April 2 works. Those are already there.
Already there on the agenda, but here's our problem, Peter, the first one.
Yeah.
We have a meeting February 20th, the week before that we have a school break.
Yeah.
So we
we need to talk about this current state if we actually need to have a meeting for that, because it could be incorporated into something else. So I just wanted to, it's not just TBD on the date, it's TBD on what kind of meeting it is. Okay? Then we have these other dates that are already there, but they may not, we have to figure out if there's sufficient time, because there's other things on those dates and those agendas. So we'll just need to look at that, but we know March 5 is locked down, March 2 is locked down, and then it may work on these other dates, but we should talk about that. And then this bottom line is kind of, what's the major deliverable in each one of these steps, if you're following along?
Peter, I want to note, you've got May 2nd, I think you meant May 7th, which is, so that's it's styled as the board self-evaluation, but it really is.
I'm sorry,
It's
you're right, May 7, and then.
You can lock that one in too.
Because I see that it was listed as retreat, so I know that's not a regular meeting agenda, so I didn't know if that works for us, because I don't know what else is in the pipe.
That works. Check the agenda plan, but it works.
Okay, and then, we'll have to figure out whether the 21st works, because that's a date, that's a real meeting, right? So we'll have to figure out that works. But
We have already slotted in the strategic plan for discussion that night if needed.
so this is just putting on a piece of paper what I've discussed in the last couple of meetings, and so it's not new. It's not new information, it's just kind of putting it down on a piece of paper so you can kind of follow along. Before I go to the next step, let me just take a deep breath. Questions, thoughts, comments, particularly Karen and Tony. Is there anything I didn't represent properly from our meeting?
No, it's hers.
Well, I was going to say, I think this pretty much encompasses some of the stuff that we had talked about, and we had talked about the timeline, and I have two questions. One was because I know that Tony had given us some of her ideas and suggestions, and she had suggested maybe a 3-year plan versus a 5-year plan, so I'd love her to opine on that, just because I know we're focused on 5-year, but the only question I had is, one of the things we talked about is if this timeline is slightly rushed, if we need to move forward to extend our 5-year plan by a small window of time, so that we do have the opportunity to get the appropriate feedback and information needed to put this our new one into place, what that would look like.
Ms. Kowalski, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I guess where are we fitting in basically community survey engagement?
It has to go in parallel.
In parallel.
Mm-hmm.
And how would we get to incorporate that?
You would incorporate it at vision and mission, and you would incorporate it particularly at strategic goals. There's a whole question on surveying, right? That's what comes We should probably go through the next page and then come back, but are there any other? Go ahead.
Now, my question was just about the where are we now? What do you envision data from where we are? I mean, like, what do you, when you say the where are we now, what are we going to be using to determine that?
I would think, you need data on, if you're gonna talk about core academics, you need to talk about where you are, school by school, grade by grade, right? And as you know, we did a session, was that before the election or after the election? We did a session on Greenwich Library on a Sunday, and there was like nobody there, and but the data was it was a presentation from the administration of select data set. You really don't want to run a strategy process like that. You want to run a strategy process where you say, here's all the data, let the board absorb the data, and then they can have a cogent conversation about what insights they're drawing out of it. So that's a good data set to start with, but it needs to be expanded a little bit. And I would think it would be data that we already look at and normally have. It's not like you go create, comprehensive, right? You need almost like a little book. But I don't know, I'm open to anything else anybody would want to. You just have to have a baseline, because the challenge is if you go in the strategy process and someone says, I think we're doing really well in this subject at the high school, and someone else says, I have data we're not looking at any data, then you spend a lot of time in some silly conversations when the fact base is the fact base, right? So, anyway.
Ms. Kowalski.
The data that was presented at the session in the library, can we get that recirculated to the board?
It's posted. It's posted. Yes.
I don't remember the date, but it really was right around the time of the election.
October 6th?
It was October, right?
It was early October, the first weekend in October.
Yeah, I'll get you the link.
Okay, yeah, the link, because I could spend 20 minutes trying to.
So I guess as I look at this, I just want to say it's ambitious to think we're going to get there by June 18th. I want to say that now so that we don't hang ourselves and rush something that we're not ready with, that we aren't prepared to say, you know what, we're going to back off, we're going to do the work necessary. We have strategies in place, we can leave them in place for the 6 months of the next school year as we complete the right work. Because I think, Peter, you're right, it's not really done until it's married up with execution, and I think that was the biggest challenge from the current plan, is that there really was no execution baked into the front end, and I don't want to get so far along and so far ahead of where the administration is that we've set goals that don't align to their execution plan and vice versa. So.
I think there's an underlying assumption here, and it may not be a good one. Right? So it's like reading a balance sheet. Sometimes he's telling me, look at what were the assumptions underneath it. What were your financial assumptions? It's the same thing. Part of this we designed around this assumption that we kind of have one, and there's going to be modification therefrom. We're not going to tear up everything and start over. And then to your point, part of the issue we've had with the current one is this focus on execution, right? So, but if that's not a good assumption, right, and we're gonna, because you could spend 3 meetings talking about vision and mission. You could spend 3 meetings, and I'm not saying that's good or bad, I'm not putting a value judgment on it, but my point would be, is we've kind of built this around an assumption that there won't be radical change from what we're working with right now. That may not pan out, right? We have to be open to that, but that's why it has this kind of schedule to it. But I'm open, if we want to extend this, because people want to spend more time on each phase of it, we could extend it. It's what does people want to do.
I just don't want you to rush the process when it won't result in anything that's going to be actionable. I will say, I think the high level, right, I don't see the change as the academic, personal, interpersonal, but you nailed it. Personalized learning was the only theory of action. It was only for academic. For the rest of it, it was sort of hodgepodge. And we've gotten various reports through the years, but because there were no SMART goals for each of those. There was no execution plans. Yeah, but I just gotta have to.
That's true.
I'm channeling Barbara.
Make sure we got it.
But, thank you. But I really feel like that if we don't spend the time making sure those two things are married together, we're gonna be in the same place. And, you know, I've got, I don't know, 21 months left, not that I'm counting, but that we basically put a plan in place 3 years, 5 years, and it becomes somebody else's problem, and I don't wanna do that. So-
what do we want to do?
I said ambitious, I didn't say not doable.
No, I understand. I'm asking if do we want to try this and see where it leads, or do we want to, because I'm.
Oh, I think
don't be a slave. You should never be a slave to these kind of plans, because this is all about getting solid content. I was on the last committee, and gee, shocker, I was contrarian about how they were doing it, right? But part of it was I was concerned there wasn't enough focus on the content, and all of a sudden it got to this place where somebody said, shocker, it happened right before an election, bad time to do that. And someone got really focused on, we have to get this document out. And I'm like, no, it's ready when it's ready, I think has to be our watchword. If this schedule, we get into the schedule and it's not working for everybody, I'm gonna be the first one that says, we're gonna have to back up to the schedule, because I'm only interested in doing this for content, no other reason.
Well, then I'm with you, I think this is the goal, and if we can't get there, we revisit. Be ambitious.
What we did discuss was that these are the right steps, and again, the only thing I have concern is I don't wanna rush the discussion to just put something into place that's not gonna really meet our needs. So that was the only question I had, was if we need to adjust the timing on things so that we get it, we make our decisions and they get public input on that to see if we're in the right place. What steps we might need to take, and that says 2020, so we technically have almost till just the end of December 2020, right? Wink, wink.
Yeah, I mean,
Wink, wink.
school year, but whatever. Yeah.
I know.
I'm good
Being
with it.
detailed.
Don't worry, we're not running the organization from a strategy now, so it all goes up. There's some good activities that are aligned to the strategy, but, running it off of a strategic plan is not where we're living right now. Let me just go to this last part, because there were 3 issues that we discussed in the strategy committee that were drilling down on some stuff we had talked about before as a board, okay? We talked about this community survey and input. You should know the last time we've run these kind of major things, the way it's been run is you go out and do a quantitative survey, which is, I send out a web survey and I get a whole bunch of feedback to a predefined set of questions. And I also do focus groups to get qualitative data. That's to get more. The question for us is, do we want to do that again? And then at what level of depth do we want to do it? I would argue that we could probably dust off what we've done before in terms of a quantitative survey. We could, in the committee, look and, write questions, because you could ask more questions than you could ever have somebody answer. You don't want to do that. We could probably get a quantitative survey out. The qualitative surveys, best practice is you want to have someone who's an effective focus group type person. Otherwise, when you roll it all up, it's just anecdotes, right? So we have to figure out how we want to do that and what level we want to do that. We'll wind up with more information than we probably want in the end, but the question is to the group is, how much emphasis do you want to put on this? And what's everybody's thought about this? By the way, if you do it really deeply, you probably need to use outside people. We would need to spend money to do that. Money is tight, so just or non-existent. The real question is, this is an activity of the board. And it's strategic. So on $150 million, I understand Dr. Jones is running around looking for every $3,000, but eventually, we have to have a real conversation of how important is this to us in this scheme of things. But just be aware, we don't have ready cash sitting around to go do this. It would be a decision.
I guess I'm curious as to what the committee discussed about this, because obviously you took this up at your meeting. I don't know if there was a conclusion. So basically no conclusion, it's let's figure out whether we need it and why.
Well, I think, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, we recognize this needed to be done. Tony is doing ad hoc sessions out in the community, we talked about could we leverage some of that, you know, we know we need to do it. The question was at what depth, how would we do it, and who would do it? And you pretty quickly get led to, wow, I really need to do this in a professional way, and then you run a brick wall into, how the heck am I gonna pay for that? So that was the discussion. Was there something else that we talked about in the committee that wasn't that? No. Tony? No.
Give you a sense of cost, Peter, if we go external?
I asked Tony, he probably more important things consumed. We wanted to try to look at, the last time the surveying was done by Metis Associates in New York. There was also the PSG work that was done in the strategy, but that was in a combined scope of work, so I don't know it as a discrete cost. I'm overdue to get that cost either through Tony or just, you know, getting Eugene to get it for us. I don't know what it is. One of the things we did discuss, let me just be fair, because it comes up in the next one. We did talk about putting out a call for qualified people who might be parents who would do it pro bono, right?
Yeah, how there must be,
There are people who do this in the real life.
McKinsey and BCG, like living in this town.
Right, yeah.
I already have a,
Yeah,
So
we talked about that, we have to figure out how to do that. That was gonna bring that
We
up.
don't
when we
need
go to
people
the-
that volunteer all their time. I guess we can.
Yeah, you gotta watch, right? Because you gotta get qualified people, and the other part is we have to be careful. You gotta be careful with this. They gotta really clean on the stakeholder, you know. So, but I think personally, I didn't want to jump to the conclusion. I think that's the path we should pursue. We should see if there's some people who do this for us pro bono who are qualified, and we could use Parent Link to put together a call and see if we can get some people. That's what I would do, but I don't know why. I want to see how everybody felt.
I think that's
before we
very
sprung
fiscally
that.
responsible. I like it.
Ready? Anything I missed? Nope.
Next item is, when we have these meetings, right, we should probably get a facilitator, it's not a stakeholder. So when we're talking about strategies, when we're talking about vision and mission, with those 3 meetings, we need to get someone who's an appropriate facilitator. So that's something we gotta figure out how to do. And then the last part is, and I gave you the punchline of where we're gonna look for one first, pro bono. Then the last part is you should just be aware, there are a couple of other activities that, you know, even you were still running policy governance, some of these you already knew about. We just need to get that all kind of plugged together. It doesn't need to be subsumed in this process. It just needs to be, we need to be aware and coordinated. Just if you weren't aware of, there's 4 of them. Recasting the vision was being done by the curriculum team. They've been working on that, I guess, for roughly a year, on and off. I don't know how much activity's been there. I haven't had a chance to talk to Irene Parisi about it, but you know, there may be some good leverage work there. There was an ongoing thing on performance and measurement. You know, you've seen that. There's a little thing with that. Dr. Jones is doing superintendent forums already, which is great. And then, you know, there's been some low-level conversations about, which we participated. One was, what do we do with middle school versus, right? There was that one. And of course, now that we have such a strong new leader in the high school, there's undoubtedly, those conversations are now happening about what's the high school look like, and you know, that's been bubbling for a while. So they're all low level. The point of it is they just need to kind of, this is an opportunity to coalesce and fit. Not to do, just have them kind of fit in. So that's the update. That's what we've done. If,
Keep going.
okay, that's the question. If we just, okay, we'll keep going.
Anybody object to the keep going concept?
No.
Keep running until we tap you. All right, with that, just logistically, so the audience and the camera understands what's going to happen, we are going to entertain a motion to move into executive session so we can discuss special education of the district, because we've got privacy concerns about that. What we will do is go into executive session. When we exit the executive session, we will, no votes will be taken in executive session, just discussion. When we exit executive session, we also need to then have a motion to adjourn the meeting. I'm just giving a highlight to Mr. Kelly so he knows what his role is tonight. All right, so if everybody is prepared, what we'll do is we'll move to executive session and we'll take a short recess to allow the guys to reset the room and all the rest. And then Megan, what we'll do is we'll hang up, give you a couple of minutes to blow your nose, and then we'll call you back.
Okay.
All right, can I get a motion to enter executive session?
Or to recess.
Is there a second?
No.
All right. Ms. Kowalski, all those in favor of entering the executive session? Ms. Olson? Aye. All right, we're going to enter executive session. Thank you very much.